Chapter 3, The Masterworks, Breakdown of their primary books and arguments. If Socrates did not write a single line himself, the chroniclers who did, Plato, Xenophon, and Aristophanes, gave him a peculiar kind of immortality. Their works are not mere biographies. They are laboratories in which a distinctive method of inquiry is tested, contested, and demonstrated. Chapter 3 surveys what might rightly be called the masterworks through which we know Socrates today: Plato's dialogues, the most influential and the most durable record of the method; Xenophon's Socratic writings, more practical and moralizing in tone; and Aristophanes' comic attack, a cultural mirror that shows the suspicion with which Socrates was regarded in his own city. The aim here is not to choose a single, authoritative account but to break down how each author stages Socrates, what arguments they present as Socrates's, and how the Socratic method appears in their pages. Plato's canon, the philosopher's method as staged inquiry. Plato's dialogues constitute the longest, most influential, and most philosophically varied body of work about Socrates. They are sometimes divided into rough temporal cohorts: early, middle, and late, yet they form a continuous experiment in the use of questioning as a path to definition, understanding, and, ultimately, a vision of the good. The core moves of the Socratic method, elenchus, refutation through cross-examination, dialectical refinement, and the ascent from provisional beliefs to more precise knowledge, are repeatedly reconfigured to suit different ends: ethical reflection, political theory, epistemology, or metaphysics. Euthyphro, the pivot from piety to definition. In this tightly argued, compact dialogue, Socrates presses Euthyphro to specify what piety truly is, not merely what pleases the gods or what a priestly class declares. The famous Euthyphro dilemma, a question about whether piety is loved by the gods because it is pious or pious because the gods love it, crystallizes a central challenge: moral predicates cannot be accepted by tradition or authority alone, they must be grounded in a coherent, examinable standard. The result is not a complete answer but a demonstration of the insufficiency of easy pieties and the necessity of deeper inquiry. For the reader, Euthyphro becomes a primer on the stubbornness of definitions and the discipline required to test them. Apology, the defense of a method, not a confession of innocence. In the Apology, Socrates does not present a systematic treatise, he performs a defense. Yet the argument structure is revealing. He refuses to stop questioning merely because authorities fear disruption. He reframes wisdom as awareness of one's own ignorance. His claim that the unexamined life is not worth living reframes the purpose of philosophy as a moral and civic obligation. The Apology thus models the argumentative posture of the Socratic method: insistence on reason, exposure of contradictions in interlocutors' beliefs, and the insistence that virtue, true knowledge of what is good, is more valuable than conventional success. Crito, law, obligation, and the limits of civil disobedience. Here the method is transposed from individual definitions to collective norms. Socrates argues that one cannot escape the law without undermining the order of the city, even when the law's exercise of power seems unjust. The dialogue tests whether civil obligation is merely procedural or grounded in prior, rational fidelity to justice itself. The method becomes a test case for critical reasoning about social contracts, obedience, and the foundation of political obligation. Meno, virtue, knowledge, and the paradox of inquiry. Meno's central question, can virtue be taught?, is answered through a Socratic itinerary that reveals the possibility and limits of knowledge. The dialogue introduces the theory of recollection, learning as a process of remembering what the soul already knows. The method here emphasizes the dialectical motion from belief to knowledge, from apparent wisdom to demonstrable understanding, and from mystery to demonstrable standard. Even when the conclusion is tentative, the argumentative trajectory demonstrates how Socrates pushes interlocutors beyond confident but unfounded claims toward a more rigorous grasp of virtue. Gorgias, rhetoric, justice, and the arousal of moral scrutiny. Gorgias pits the sophist's rhetoric against the philosopher's insistence on knowledge and justice. Can rhetoric, which persuades an audience, be equated with justice or virtue? The dialogue builds a sustained critique of the idea that persuasion alone constitutes genuine authority. Socrates argues that, without knowledge of the good and a commitment to it, rhetoric is a dangerous tool in a city's moral life. The method here intensifies the moral stakes of argument, not merely to win a debate, but to discern and defend what is truly right. The Republic and its companion dialectic projects the deepest, most systematic use of the method to date. The Republic stages philosophy as political education, seeking to articulate what justice looks like in the city and in the soul. The dialogue deploys the method to examine every rung of social organization, from the education of guardians to the structure of the city and the theory of knowledge, the line, the cave, the form of the good. The central argumentative move is to show that a well-ordered life requires that both individual virtue and political order be grounded in knowledge of the good. The method culminates in a grand synthesis, a theory of virtue as harmonious knowledge, a theory of the soul's tripartite structure, and a political vision of rulers who know the form of the good. It is the most comprehensive demonstration of how a Socratic inquiry, conducted in dialogic form, can become a blueprint for moral and political life. Phaedo, the philosophical anthropology of death and the soul. In Phaedo, the dialogue extends the method into metaphysics and anthropology. Socrates argues for the immortality of the soul and for the existence of timeless forms even as the body dies and the senses fail. The argument moves through a series of considerations: the theory of recollection again, the affinity of soul to the forms, the perfect purifications of the soul, and the doom waiting for the philosopher who has not lived according to the truth. The method here is less about social practice and more about sacred questions of being, knowledge, and the nature of reality. Yet the elenchus remains evident, a disciplined screening of beliefs about life, death, and what it means to live well. What these dialogues collectively show is not a single, fixed doctrine but a repertoire of argumentative strategies aimed at clarifying meaning, exposing inconsistency, and guiding readers toward a more rigorous conception of virtue, knowledge, and the good life. Plato's project, in sum, uses the Socratic method not merely to settle questions but to reframe what questions count as worth asking in the first place. Xenophon, the practical Socrates, the man of daily virtue. Xenophon's Socrates presents a more down-to-earth, ethical, and coach-like figure than Plato's often metaphysical interlocutor. His writings are less about the ascent to the form and more about the formation of character, training in the arts of discipline, and the cultivation of practical wisdom. Where Plato uses the elenchus to probe definitions, Xenophon leans toward everyday counsel and the demonstration of virtue in ordinary life. Memorabilia: Socrates in conversation as a man of practical wisdom. Xenophon collects several late-night and daytime dialogues in which Socrates instructs younger men in how to speak well, how to reason, and how to live, with a strong emphasis on self-control, temperance, courage, and social responsibility. The method is retained: the probing questions, the careful attention to definitions, but the aims are framed by tangible virtues: honesty, frugality, diligent inquiry, and the avoidance of ignorance. The Socrates in Memorabilia is a teacher who embodies the virtues he seeks to inculcate. His method becomes a model of ethical discipline. Apology: Xenophon's version is shorter, more straightforward account of Socrates' defense against accusations of impiety and corrupting the youth. Xenophon's Socrates emphasizes the value of practical wisdom, the avoidance of arrogance, and a life devoted to moral improvement rather than philosophical fame. The tone is more conciliatory and pious than Plato's. The argument is less about proving metaphysical propositions and more about illustrating a principled devotion to short life and virtue. Symposium: Xenophon's, separate from Plato's, a series of conversations about love, virtue, and the good life told through a Socratic lens but with Xenophon's own emphasis on practical ethics. The Socrates here continues to model thoughtful dialogue about human flourishing and the ethics of desire, but within a social and domestic setting that foregrounds everyday virtue. Economicus: household management and the educative role of a husband. This dialogue brings Socratic questioning into the realm of agriculture, economy, and family life, expanding the method into how one cultivates a capable, disciplined person within the structure of a household. The questions revolve around prudence, temperance, and the wise distribution of resources, a pragmatic extension of the method into the economy of life. Xenophon's portraits remind readers that the Socratic method can be effective in settings far from the philosophical academy, in tutoring the young or in teaching a man how to manage a household. His Socrates is less likely to be accused of metaphysical pretension and more likely to be read as a physician of the soul, diagnosing practical vices and prescribing habits that lead to virtue.
Aristophanes, the comic mirror and the social critique.
Aristophanes' The Clouds is not a sober treatise but a satirical skit that targets both Socrates and the broad movement of philosophical speculation in Athens. In The Clouds, Socrates is cast as a sophistic windbag who teaches outrageous ways of thinking, professing to have new and dangerous ideas about the gods, nature, and piety. The Clouds uses caricature to explore the social anxieties surrounding the new philosophers, the fear that they erode traditional piety, subvert parental authority, and threaten the stability of the city. The value of Aristophanes' portrayal is not in offering an accurate portrait of Socrates but in showing the culture's reception of his method. The play exposes the suspicion, fear, and political tension that surrounded a figure who relentlessly questioned conventional wisdom. It is a reminder that the Socratic method did not emerge in a vacuum. It provoked fierce debate about whether critical inquiry should govern a city's life or whether belief and custom should hold sway. The Clouds helps readers understand the rhetoric of counter-argument that Socrates' own question-asking provoked in his contemporaries, and it shows how method and reception are mutually shaping forces in the life of philosophy.
The Masterworks by Number and Narrative Logic, a quick map.
Plato's primary texts, with the method in view: Euthyphro, definitional problem of piety; Apology, the disciplined defense of the life of inquiry; Crito, the social and legal implications of allegiance to the city; Meno, the question of virtue and the recollection of knowledge; Gorgias, the relationship between rhetoric, justice, and knowledge; Republic, the architecture of virtue, knowledge, and political order, culminating in the form of the good; Phaedo, the soul, the afterlife, and the theory of forms; Phaedrus, rhetoric as a craft that must be guided by true knowledge. Across these texts, the method consistently moves from tentative judgments to carefully argued positions that can bear scrutiny. Xenophon's configurations, Memorabilia, the teacher and the practical demonstrator of virtue; Apology, the more straightforward defense of a simple, morally serious life; Symposium, love and virtue in everyday settings; Economicus, household wisdom as an arena for moral training. The method here is less metaphysical and more ethical and educational, but the underlying aim, to cultivate discernment and self-control via conversation, is the same.
Aristophanes' critique, The Clouds as social commentary and cultural counterpoint, a reminder that the method's novelty can provoke fear, satire, and political backlash. It cautions readers about the interplay between intellectual novelty and civic life. The core argumentative motifs across the masterworks. The elenchus as a disciplined challenge to received wisdom. In Plato, the elenchus is the engine by which an interlocutor's premises are tested and corrected. The technique never stops at a weak definition, it pursues a more robust articulation of what is being claimed and why it matters. In Xenophon, the method remains skillful questioning but is immediately aimed at practical improvement in moral discipline rather than purely abstract definitions. The ascent from belief to knowledge. A recurring pattern is the transition from confident but unexamined beliefs to clarified, justified beliefs. The dialogues are not content with mere persuasion, they demand that claims about virtue, justice, knowledge, or the good life be defendable through reasoned argument, evidence, and, in some cases, experiential demonstrations. The ethical thrust, virtue as knowledge or virtuous disposition. The Masterworks repeatedly insist that to live well is to possess a form of knowledge or practical wisdom about how to act rightly. The precise content of that wisdom changes. Sometimes it looks like knowledge of the form of the good, sometimes it looks like temperance and self-control, but the underlying idea is consistent: ignorance about virtue is the root of moral error. The tension between rhetoric and truth. Gorgias, and, in broader terms, the entire dialogue tradition around rhetoric, force a critical look at whether persuasive power is aligned with justice. Socrates pushes the argument that mere rhetorical skill without genuine knowledge of what is good is morally dangerous. The method thus becomes a tool for safeguarding reason against sophistry. The political and the personal. The Republic literalizes a concern that Socratic inquiry must address social order, education, and political leadership. The Crito and the Apology push a link between personal integrity and civic responsibility. The method thus is not only about individual enlightenment but about the conditions under which a city can sustain a good life. Juxtaposition and interpretation: why these masterworks matter for understanding the Socratic method.
The multiplicity of voices.
The masterworks do not present a single, unambiguous portrait of Socrates.
They offer divergent depictions, some more metaphysical, Plato, some more practical, Xenophon, some satirical, Aristophanes. The method emerges not as a monolithic system but as a family of practices adapted to different aims: moral education, political theory, epistemological clarification, and even social critique. The divergence is not a failure, it is evidence of a living tradition in which the method evolves with the aims of inquiry. The historical limit and the pedagogical payoff. We must remember that these are literary reconstructions, not unfiltered historical records. The value of studying them lies precisely in how they stage rational method under tension, how to question, how to defend, how to teach, and how to persuade while remaining committed to truth-seeking.
Readers are invited to compare the methods, to notice where assumptions are taken for granted, and to test the robustness of arguments when confronted with competing viewpoints.
The pedagogical inheritance. In modern classrooms, law schools, philosophy seminars, political theory courses, the Socratic method is often framed as a practice of dialogue designed to sharpen reasoning, improve critical thinking, and cultivate moral discernment. The masterworks provide the foundational demonstration of how to structure a conversation that leads participants from superficial opinions to reflective, substantiated conclusions. They also show that a method anchored in questioning must be tempered by intellectual humility, the recognition that one's own beliefs may be wrong and that the path to truth is a communal enterprise.
The larger legacy: why the masterworks endure.
They train the reader to confront complexity. No single dialogue provides a final, fixed answer to the big questions about virtue, justice, knowledge, or the good life. Instead, they compel readers to engage with the texture of reasoning itself, to notice ambiguities, to follow a chain of reasoning, and to assess whether conclusions can withstand scrutiny. They situate inquiry within human life. The Socratic method, as dramatized by Plato and enriched by Xenophon, is not a sterile exercise but a way of living that attempts to align beliefs with actions, words with deeds. The dialogues insist that the good life cannot be separated from thoughtful, ongoing examination of one's most cherished commitments. They anticipate modern educational ideals. The practice of asking strategic questions, seeking definitions, and resisting easy answers is a cornerstone of critical thinking pedagogy. The masterworks help shape a tradition in which education is a process of guided discovery rather than passive receipt of dogma. In law, philosophy, and the humanities, the spirit of the Socratic method still informs how teachers challenge students to articulate reasons, identify assumptions, and justify conclusions under scrutiny. A closing note for the reader. The masterworks, Plato's dense, visionary dialogues, Xenophon's practical portraits, Aristophanes' pointed satire, are not a single, tidy system but a living archive. They invite us to practice the Socratic method as a discipline of mind and a discipline of life. Their arguments may seem paradoxical, their conclusions sometimes elusive, yet they offer an enduring invitation to question with care, to argue with clarity, and to embrace a life of inquiry as the highest form of human flourishing. In the pages that follow, you will encounter not just arguments about virtue, knowledge, and law, but a method that asks you to participate, to question your own beliefs, and to test your ideas in the same constructive, unrelenting way that Socrates himself is depicted as using in the masterworks that bear his name.